So what about that depth year thing? As you may have noticed, I haven't done an update on how my depth year is going in quite a while, and the reason is that I'm not on it anymore. As I explained in my very first video, which I will link all of my depth year videos down below, I was going to do this for the first 6 months of the year and then essentially stop because I had a big trip to America coming up and it simply wasn't practical to keep doing the depth year because I would have to spend a lot of money on food and on possible things that I could get in America, etc., etc. And that is why I set the limit for just the first half year. But honestly, even before then, it wasn't going as strong as I would have wanted it to. And in this video, I want to tell you about what my expectations were, what expectations weren't met, how the whole thing felt to me, the positives, the negatives of my depth year, and just reevaluate, or depth half a year, is that a thing? Depth semi-year, semi-depth year, I don't know. Anyways, how it felt to me and how I feel I could use it as a means of self-growth or not. And yeah, let's get into it. So essentially, the negative thing that I have to start off with is that I did not mean to do a depth year. In the beginning of the year, it was the end of December, everybody started rolling out their depth year videos on YouTube in the pagan community, in the witch community, and I was like, maybe I should be a part of this. You know, I like to be a part of community things that have to do with self-growth and self-development. However, I did not have a very clear goal and a very clear purpose in mind. I did figure that out, and I did get onto some things and find out some things about myself that I wouldn't have seen otherwise, or that I wouldn't have experienced otherwise. So I wouldn't say that I faked the depth year or that I feel like it gave me nothing or anything like that. But I do feel like it wasn't perfect, which nobody's depth year was perfect. I entirely acknowledge that as well. But I just feel like I didn't even need a depth year in the way that I thought I may. Because in the beginning, as you saw, I made a video about underspending, not overspending, and how I struggle with not investing money in myself or investing money in things that may make me happier or that may benefit my growth. And that is the reason that the depth year was kind of a weird decision for me to begin with. Because a lot of people, me included, combined it with a low buy year, which meant that I also set myself some boundaries for my buying habits, which didn't lead to a lot because I didn't buy a lot to begin with, and I don't buy into consumption as much as other people, which is an issue for me because it means I underspend, but I go into that very deeply in my underspending video, so I will link that below. Either way, the point is I felt like, for me personally, the depth year probably wasn't the best decision in that regard, because the point is to not buy things, to go deep with the things you do, to appreciate the tools that you already have, to appreciate the things that surround you, which I am fairly okay at. But even if I don't appreciate them, that doesn't mean that I go towards other things and acquire more and buy more to fill that hole. It just means I basically do nothing. That is more my thing. I do nothing. I don't go deep with anything, but I also don't amass more things. So that was more the thing that I was struggling with, and that I wanted to tackle with it, which the depth year isn't exactly the right choice for that, I think. I do need me days, but I wouldn't call them depth days, because in the beginning I had this idea of depth days where I dedicate a day to having depth time, where I read a book that I've had for a long time, or I use a tarot deck that I haven't used in a while, and really go deep with it. But the thing with this is that that isn't really what I needed. What I needed to do was really to just have me time, to have days where I am in complete control. I do everything that I want at my own pace. And then naturally, I will engage with the things that are positive for me and that are good for me. And forcing myself to engage with a specific deck just because I haven't in a while, or because I feel like I haven't gone deep enough with it, rather than going with the deck that I actually want to work with, that doesn't quite work for me personally. I don't really see much of a purpose in forcing myself to go deep with something that doesn't resonate with me in that moment, because I am very fluctuating. My attention is very fluctuating. Can you say that? Is that a word combination that works? Anyways, so yes, I can only really go deep with things that I feel called to, and I need to give myself that permission, and I needed to give myself that permission during the depth year to have me time rather than depth time, where I like schedule time with a certain deck or a certain book. I just need to go with the flow and go with what interests me in that moment. That is much more important than forcing myself into depth with an item that I don't resonate with. So in trying to sort of turn the depth year around, because I felt like I started it so quickly that I didn't even have, an imagination of what I wanted it to be. So I did all that work in the new year, which I very much liked and appreciated, because that is essentially what the depth year gave me. It gave me the time to reflect on where I needed to deal with certain shadows and certain struggles that I had. One of those struggles was underspending, was money shadows, as you saw in those videos. And another was reading, and the fact that I struggled with reading, that I had no idea how to motivate myself to read more books. And I also have a very in-depth video about that and how I sort of conquered that, even though I still struggle with it sometimes if I'm stuck on books that I'm not really into. So those were some of the most meaningful insights in this year, and I feel like the depth year really pushed me towards those insights. I wouldn't have even thought about my underspending habit and my lack of reading as deeply as I did if I hadn't done the depth year. So I feel in that regard it benefited me immensely, and it brought me onto paths that I wouldn't otherwise have gone down, or at least not at that time and not in that way. And in general, I also reflected more about my buying behavior, which is kind of the low buy aspect of the whole thing. And that was quite interesting as well, because I noticed how much hope I sometimes place on items to give me spiritual depth. Not just items, also people, funnily enough. But yes, I am definitely a depth seeker, which probably has to do with the fact that my moon is in Scorpio. I seek depth in many things that I do, but often don't quite manage to reach that level of depth that I want to reach. If I buy something without thinking about it, I do it because I hope that it will give me some depth of meaning. I talked about buying a pendulum in order to get depth from that and a new depth of practice from that, even though I might as well have just used any of my necklaces as pendulums if I really wanted to do that. And reflecting on my buying behavior in this way and how much it is tied to my spirituality and my lifestyle, and how I need to be careful not to make buying decisions based on wanting more depth spiritually or in my lifestyle. That was also a very, very important lesson that the depth year taught me. But I still can't help but feel that I did not quite have the constancy with my depth year that other people had with theirs. It wasn't on my mind every day. It wasn't even on my mind every week. It was for a time, but then I just sort of drifted off. And that doesn't mean that I didn't fulfill the tasks that I set myself for the depth year, but it certainly meant that I didn't engage with it in a very conscious manner. And that is where I feel that I could have done a better job, even though I don't regret how it went, because I feel quite good. I'm not going to lie. So I'm fine. I'm not like blaming myself or telling myself I failed or something like that. I'm not the type of person who does that. But anyways, so I feel like that is where I would improve myself if I were to do a depth year again or anything like this, any exercise like this. I would do it more consciously and more often because, funnily, because I am someone who goes with what resonates with me and then I go deep with it, I usually end up going really deep with something for a day and then it's just out of my mind and I move on to the next thing. And that is fine. I know that I work this way, and it led to those deep insights through the depth year that weren't based on constancy, but more like bursts of, okay, I have to think about the depth year. I have to reflect on how it's going. You know what I mean? And that is where those insights came from about the book and about reading and about my buying habits and all of those things. That's usually how it happens. I just have this burst of inspiration, if you will. So I feel like I have to draw some sort of conclusion here. And my conclusion is that my depth year went completely, what should I call it? Semi-depth year? My semi-depth year went completely differently from what I thought it might be, because in the beginning I thought it would all be about consistency, about consciously doing this, but it was much more about, well, consistently reminding myself every few weeks or every month whenever I wanted to do an update video for YouTube, to reflect on it and to take a step back and learn from it. And that is where those big insights came from. And I think a big part of this, obviously, is the fact that I created this as something that I would publicly talk about on YouTube. And in that way, I was pressured to reflect on it if I wanted to make a YouTube video about it, which is probably why I haven't made one in a while, because I didn't feel like reflecting on it because not much has happened. But now that I feel like I'm more done with it because I stopped doing it before I traveled to America, I feel like I can sort of draw my conclusions and give myself credit for what went right, which is my insights about reading, even though I still struggle with it sometimes, and my insights about my money shadows and underspending. Those are like the two key things that came from it, and realizing my spending behavior, etc. But at the same time, I feel like I still have a lot of growing to do with regards to actually going deep for a longer period of time with subjects, with books, with tarot decks, and not just cram all of it into a few hours, because that is the thing. I work very quickly. If I set my mind to it, I burn through something very quickly and go deep with it very quickly and then sort of burn out. Aries, you know, Aries, fire signs, hi. So that's probably why. But that's okay. I'm working on that. But at the same time, I'm also sort of fine with it. I feel like the way I engage with things is positive, it's nourishing for me, it's inspiring for me. So I don't feel like that needs a whole lot of tweaking, but I do wish for a little bit more consistency and consciously engaging with concepts such as the depth year or any other goal that I set. So I don't know. I know that it's only October now, but I would like to hear whether you guys who are doing a depth year still, or have done your semi-depth year, or have stopped your depth year because you fell off the wagon or whatever. If you have a plan what to do with 2020, if you have a wish of what you want to consciously engage in the next year, because I feel like maybe I'll do a more focused resolution of going deep with certain subjects and really holding myself accountable for that. And yeah, that's something I can imagine doing. I wouldn't tie it to the low buy thing anymore, because that is really not an issue for me. And I feel like I can do that. I have a handle on my money, on my spending. What I need a handle on is to regularly take time for myself, engage with what I want to engage with, whether it's something new or something old. And I might want to integrate that more consciously. I already am, but maybe I will set a resolution around that for 2020. Not quite sure yet. I will see. So yes, tell me what resolutions you want to set, what is going on in your depth year, how it is going, how it is not going, and also whether you have any plans for 2020, since that is fast approaching. And yeah, I will put some links down below to other videos, to my Patreon and stuff like that, in case you want to join that. Subscribe to me if you haven't yet. Dwell in my domain. I'm happy that you're here. Thank you for watching. And I hope that you have the greatest of days, the greatest of weeks, and I will see you very soon.